Much of the criticism of the conservative Supreme Court justices who ruled against same-sex marriage last week has centered around Scalia and around Thomas and Robertson. Some of the things that they've said, we personally covered Scalia and Robertson, but Thomas deserves a lot of disdain for what he wrote against the idea of same-sex marriage and him trying to knock down the logic of those who are working towards it. So he deserves a lot of scorn. Recently, George Takei gave it to him, and so we're going to read you some of that because he has an awesome historical perspective on what Thomas was talking about in that particular case. Now, to sum up what Thomas said, here's a short excerpt. Thomas reflected on the origins of human dignity within society, invoking the belief that humans have God-given inherent worth. That vision is the foundation upon which this nation was built. This is his actual quote here. The corollary of that principle is that human dignity cannot be taken away by the government. Slaves did not lose their dignity any more than they lost their humanity. Those held in internment camps did not lose their dignity because the government confined them. And those denied government benefits certainly do not lose their dignity because the government denies them those benefits. So, and he implies there then that the government cannot take away your dignity by denying you certain rights or discriminating against you in the way that those who were pushing for same-sex marriage at the time were saying that they were. He's saying, look, you may not be able to get married, but there's no way your dignity can be taken away because that is inherent. And that is, I believe, ridiculous. The government can do many different things to try to take away or deny someone's inherent dignity or humanity. And George Takei, in his historical story, is going to demonstrate that. But what's your initial response to Thomas?
I think George Takei articulates this much better than I could. But the one point that I would like to make is that in Clarence Thomas's eyes, in his perspective, if the U.S. government treats you as a second-class citizen, that is not taking your dignity away. And he's saying this as an African-American Supreme Court justice. Now, George Takei is a lot harsher, thankfully, and I love exactly what he had to say. So let's
here's the problem for Thomas. George Takei actually has experience with the internment camps, the internment of Japanese Americans around the time of World War II. So these are quotes from George Takei, who's one of our favorite people, I think, here at this network. We've had the pleasure of actually having him in our studio in the past. And if this is any indication, we should have much more of it. I was only a child when soldiers with bayoneted rifles marched up our driveway in Los Angeles, banged on our door, and ordered us out. I remember my mother's tears as we gathered what little we could carry, and then were sent to live for many weeks in a single cramped horse stall at the Santa Anita racetracks, literally in the temporary housing of a horse his family was forced to live in. Takei reflected on his family's assets being frozen and their family being shipped by rail car a few months later to Arkansas, where they slept inside bug-infested barracks, ate in a noisy mess hall, and relieved ourselves in common latrines that had no walls between the stalls. To say that government does not bestow or grant dignity does not mean it cannot succeed in stripping it away through the imposition of unequal laws and deprivation of due process. At the very least, the government must treat all its subjects with equal human dignity. And he concluded by saying, he is a clown in blackface sitting on the Supreme Court. He gets me that angry. Those are fiery words. He just took it to warp 10.
Damn.
I love that message.
He is so eloquently spoken and so intelligent. I love George Takei. But one other point I want to make about Clarence Thomas is his argument reminds me a lot of people who will say things like, happiness is a human choice, right? So it's kind of like saying dignity is a choice. You can feel dignity regardless of what's happening to you. No, that's not true. Same goes with happiness. If someone's life is falling apart and they have family members who just died or something like that, it's so insulting to tell them, happiness is a choice. You choose to be happy or not. Get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. Okay? When you take rights away from individuals and you treat them as second-class citizens, you are, in effect, taking their dignity away. If you are telling them they're not allowed to get married or they're not allowed to get the same treatment as other Americans, you are taking their dignity away. The fact that someone like Clarence Thomas, who's a Supreme Court justice, does not understand that is troubling to say the least.
Yeah, and I love what it represents, the argument that Thomas made there, that they can't even, they know that they've lost the messaging wars when they used to try to say, you know, like that it doesn't matter if we take away their rights. Like they're not the same as the rest of us. And people were receptive to that message, the idea that these should be second-class citizens. Like, screw gay people, they don't matter, they don't deserve rights. They can't do that anymore. They know that they've lost, so they have to now say, oh, well, we're not taking away anything. They've retreated in this dark, little, discriminatory, bigoted core. And I love that they're stuck there, and I hope that he remains there. And I love especially that even after retreating that much, they still lost. That we were able to progress, we were able to have legal same-sex marriage across the country. I mean, look, we're gonna remember, like in years in the future, in decades in the future, we're gonna look back and we're gonna wonder how it wasn't legal at the time. And in the same way, perhaps, that we now look back on slavery and wonder how we ever allowed it, or the internment of the Japanese, how we ever allowed it. And I just love George Takei making the linkage there for Thomas, who should know better, but just refuses to recognize the dignity and humanity of other Americans, who refuses to understand the historical example that groups he's a part of had to go through.
Exactly.
I love the education of Clarence Thomas.
Also, there's a really great feeling to know that you're on the right side of history on this issue. I mean, Clarence Thomas and the Supreme Court justices that ruled against same-sex marriage, they're on the wrong side of history. And they will be in history books till the end of time, basically indicating that they were bigoted individuals who didn't want to give same-sex couples the same rights as everyone else.
Yeah, bigoted and small and so obviously misplaced in time.